What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at our first NFL mock draft of the season, and I thought no better time than right now, considering that the NFL Combine is only a few days away. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of changes as we get closer and closer to the actual draft in April, but since this is our first version, our pre-NFL Combine version, we're not going to get too crazy. No trades in this draft. Let's see how the combine plays out. Let's see how free agency plays out. We're going to have updates as we go, so no worries. We're going to have a trades mock version. We're going to have fun with it, but for now, we're going to keep it simple. If you guys enjoy the video in the meantime, hit that like button, subscribe, but for now, let's get right into it. We kick things off with the first overall pick as the Cincinnati Bengals select quarterback Joe Burrow. And to nobody's surprise, Burrow is the guy here, the hometown kid of Ohio. He had a record-breaking season and was dominant from start to finish. He is the clear-cut number one pick. It makes all the sense in the world for the Bengals. They are moving on from Andy Dalton. His days are numbered. They need a franchise signal caller. Joe Burrow will be the guy. Now, don't overthink it. There's a reason why every single NFL analyst is projecting this pick along with myself. And in fact, I can tell you from this first NFL mock draft that we're doing all the way to the last one, this will probably be a pick that there's no chance in hell that it changes. I don't buy the chatter that the Bengals will trade this pick. I don't buy the chatter that Joe Burrow is going to threaten sitting out if he's drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a pairing that makes too much sense. And at the end of the day, Cincinnati Bengals fans, rejoice as you get your signal caller of the future in Joe Burrow. With the second pick overall, the Washington Redskins select defensive end Chase Young. And a situation very similar to last year, the first overall pick is a quarterback, while the second overall pick is probably actually the best overall prospect in the entire draft. The Redskins get lucky here as they land Chase Young, a guy that's being touted as better than either one of the Bosa brothers heading into the NFL, and that is a scary thought. What I will say is interesting here, however, is that the Washington Redskins, out of any positional group, they probably have the most talent across their defensive line. So Chase Young, it's a luxury pick here, if anything. I'd actually be really interested to hear from Redskins fans because if I'm you, I'd actually be kind of interested in a quarterback. Obviously, we have to see what happens in free agency. Obviously, you selected Dwayne Haskins last year. But from what I saw in him, he didn't look all that good. Not sure if he was quite the answer. Obviously, there was a lot of other issues on that Redskins team, so it's tough to blame him. He did have some success towards the end of the season, but again, at that point, things were pretty much wrapped up. The competition wasn't the best, so take that with a grain of salt. If there was an outside chance of a sleeper pick here, I would say it's a quarterback. You've got a new head coach in Ron Rivera, albeit he is defensive-minded, so that does help in the aspect of Chase Young being the pick here or another defensive player. But again, I think this probably falls in the territory of don't overthink this. Go with the best overall player. Chase Young is that. However, the Redskins are a very intriguing team. They could potentially throw a wrench into this entire draft very early on if they decide to get a little bit crazy. At number 3, the Detroit Lions select cornerback Jeff Okudah. And a lot of people believe that this is really where the NFL draft begins because the first 2 picks are pretty chalky. But in reality, the Detroit Lions could go a number of different directions. Sure, they can go ahead and stay put here, which if they do, they have to decide, well, are we going to address the offense or the defense? And if we do address the defense like a lot of people predict with that defensive-minded philosophy that Matt Patricia has, will it be the secondary? Will it be the defensive line with a prospect maybe like a Derrick Brown? Personally, I do think it will be Okudah because, well, there's been a lot of rumors swirling about the departure of one Darius Slay. Okudah is a replacement that makes perfect sense, a plug-in guy from day one. He is the best cornerback in this draft. Now, personally, if I were a betting man, I'd say that the Detroit Lions are the most likely out of these first three teams to trade out of their pick, probably with the Miami Dolphins. But since we are excluding trades here, the Lions stay put and select Okudah at number 3. At number 4, the New York Giants select Alabama offensive lineman Jedrick Wills. And this is the point in the draft where the Giants, unlike the previous 3 teams, could go in a number of different directions. Personally, I do think it should be offensive line. You invested a early pick in Daniel Jones last year. Go ahead and provide him some protection on a spotty offensive line and ensure that he can stay healthy for you guys moving forward. Now, there's some other options at offensive line with Wills and with Thomas and with Wirfs. So there are some other names to keep an eye out for, but I do think Wills is probably the safest one out of those guys. His name has started to go up draft boards. We know Dave Gettleman's affinity for targeting the offensive and defensive lines, getting those big guys. So I do think it's a pick that makes sense. Protect your quarterback, open up running lanes for Saquon Barkley. Make life for that offense easier. Don't overthink this one. You don't necessarily need a sexy pick here in New York. Wills is a guy that should be a stalwart on that offensive line for years to come. At number 5, the Miami Dolphins select quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. And if the Dolphins actually want to make this pick a reality come draft day, they are 1,000% going to have to trade up because there are multiple other teams that will be interested in Tua. Because, again, I think if he didn't get hurt this year with that serious hip issue, well, he'd be in the conversation for first pick overall. That's how impressive he has been in his years at Alabama. But again, at the same time, it's hard to ignore the injuries he has suffered there because all of a sudden you have to bring up the question, does he have durability concerns? And do you want to take that risk when it comes to a future franchise quarterback? I believe that the medical will clear out come NFL draft day. The Miami Dolphins have expressed interest, and they need a franchise guy. Ryan Fitzpatrick had some really nice moments last year, but he is not the long-term solution. But on the flip side, he provides a great mentor for Tua as he will likely be redshirted his rookie year. And afterwards, as he takes the reins and learns from one Ryan Fitzpatrick. In the meantime, the Miami Dolphins hopefully finally get their future franchise quarterback, maybe their future Russell Wilson, as they stabilize that position for years to come. At number 6, the LA Chargers select quarterback Justin Herbert. And just like that, that's our second straight quarterback off the board. Our third quarterback in the first 6 picks, as there will absolutely be a run on signal callers in the first 10 picks. Now, for Herbert, this has been a pairing with the Chargers that's been reported for a while, and if anything, it's gotten more rampant after the news that Phillip Rivers would not be returning to the Chargers came out. Obviously, there's a lot of things that could change here, specifically free agent quarterback additions for the Chargers, but if that doesn't occur, then Herbert is the logical choice. Personally, I'm not quite sold on Herbert. I think the top quarterback in this draft, if you can assure me health, is Tua, followed by Burrow. And then there's a bit of a drop-off, and then you get to Herbert. I think a dark horse candidate that you could potentially look at here is the defense, specifically the defensive line for the Chargers. A guy like Derrick Brown wouldn't shock me at all. But for now, since we haven't seen any free agent additions, obviously, since we haven't gotten to that point in time in the NFL offseason, we are going with Herbert as the new signal caller for the LA Chargers. Next at number 7, the Carolina Panthers select defensive lineman Derrick Brown. And maybe I'm a little bit biased here as a Panthers fan, but I really do think that the Panthers are one of the most fascinating teams in terms of the ways they could go here. And maybe that's simply because they're undergoing a wide-scale rebuild. But the fact remains, they could go anywhere from quarterback, as we still don't really know what's going to happen with Cam Newton. They could go offensive line, someone to protect their question mark of a quarterback. They could also go wide receiver, someone like a Jeudy, because is DJ Moore really a number 1 wide receiver in the NFL? And I mean, you could always use help at that position. Don't get me started on Curtis Samuel. Losing Greg Olsen, who was probably your best pass catcher, is also very tough. Then on the defensive side of things, that defensive tackle position is going to be a big focal point because Gerald McCoy is going to be a free agent. K'Wan Short isn't getting any younger. Then at the linebacker level, Luke Kuechly, the unexpected, heartbreaking retirement. That's all of a sudden an area of huge need. Isaiah Simmons is going to be a popular name. Personally, I'm not a fan just because I think a lot of people expect him to just be that plug-in for Kuechly, but Kuechly was just on a whole nother level. And Simmons, well, he's still regarded as a hybrid. Is he a safety or is he a linebacker? Answer me that question first. Then in the secondary, well, James Bradbury expected to be a free agent that probably isn't retained by Carolina. An area of need that hasn't properly been addressed since the days of Josh Norman. That's also a possibility. But right now, I am going with Derrick Brown. I think he is a steal at that position. I think he's the best player available. And really, with the amount of holes on this team defensively, I think that's the biggest one, especially if they start to lose free agents there. At number 8, the Arizona Cardinals select offensive lineman Mekhi Becton. And if I had to guess, I'd say that the Cardinals camp right now is split one of two ways when it comes to this pick. Either if they pick offense, go wide receiver, or offensive lineman is the other possibility. Now, I'd love to hear from the Cardinals fans out there in the comments. What's your preference? Do you want to see that offensive lineman, or do you want to see another weapon for Kyler Murray? Or maybe you just want to see a defensive player as well. All those are possibilities. The Cardinals have holes, but I think after getting your franchise quarterback last year, you have to go ahead and focus on protecting him. Sure, it would be nice to get his former teammate in CeeDee Lamb, and there's been a lot of clamor, even from Murray, to do just that. But you can go ahead and get wide receiver talent later on. It's easier to hit on wide receivers in the later drafts than it is on other positions. That's why Mekhi Becton makes sense here. Go ahead, make sure that Murray isn't running for his life on every single play. Becton's name has been a riser so far. We will see what happens in the combine and whether that stock continues to stay high. At number 9, the Jacksonville Jaguars select linebacker Isaiah Simmons. And Simmons was a guy that we mentioned beforehand. And personally, I think the position he's more well-suited to play is a linebacker. The Jaguars definitely have a need at that position. They could also use help in the secondary after losing Jalen Ramsey. But they do have a pick later on that could probably be used to better address that in terms of best player available. Simmons is probably that next guy up. He is very versatile, and he could be used a number of different ways. He has gotten comps to guys like Jamal Adams. I think a decent comp would be someone like a Thomas Davis, who initially entered the league for the Panthers as a safety, then became a linebacker. We'll see, but either way, you can't deny that Simmons is an absolute freak athlete. The Jaguars, offensively speaking, they could also use wide receiver help outside of DJ Chark. But again, I think you go best player available defensively. To me, that is Simmons at this point. At number 10, the Cleveland Browns select offensive lineman Andrew Thomas. And so much for all those preseason talks that the Browns could potentially be playoff contenders and vying for a spot in the Super Bowl, as they yet again have a top 10 selection in the NFL draft. Now, there's no mistakes about it. They have a lot of big-time names on this team. But the problem at the end of the day, personnel-wise, was that on that offensive line, there were a lot of holes. They didn't provide protection for Baker Mayfield. He was constantly under pressure, and as a result, he didn't have enough time to find his guys. Now, you could also argue that, well, the Browns didn't have the right head coaches in place. They had too many personalities on that team. And while all those things are true, as far as positional groups, I think we all recognize that they have to upgrade that offensive line. Andrew Thomas at one point was regarded as the best offensive line prospect in this entire draft, and I think probably by a lot of people he still is. I think getting him here at number 10 is a steal. He's a little bit raw, but nonetheless, he is a day one starter for the Browns. Next at number 11, the New York Jets select offensive lineman Tristan Wirfs. And in a situation similar to the Cleveland Browns, even though there was some talent offensively for the Jets after the addition of Le'Veon Bell, the biggest point of weakness for them, other than the fact that Sam Darnold missed several games, was that offensive line. It never really got it going. And you would assume that the Jets spend several picks on that offensive line throughout the draft. I think Wirfs here makes a lot of sense. He's a young guy that you can insert day one. Maybe some people might be clamoring for a wide receiver with the expected departure of Robbie Anderson, but I believe you have to fix that offensive line first. Give Sam Darnold some more time so that he can develop better, and then in due time he will be able to find his targets down the field and guys like a Le'Veon Bell and really get the most bang out of your buck from those playmakers. At number 12, the Las Vegas Raiders select wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. And in my eyes, Jeudy is the best wide receiver prospect this year. He has impeccable route running, which is so important for rookie wide receivers. And honestly, he's probably going to be the next great Alabama wide receiver to come out of there in the same breath as guys maybe like a Julio Jones or a Calvin Ridley. We'll see. But what really matters here is this is both a great value and a huge area of need for the Raiders after the brief stint that Antonio Brown had there. Anytime you have your tight end being one of the leaders in terms of pass catching and yards, you know that you usually need an upgrade at that wide receiver position. Now, there's a lot of chatter that the Raiders might move on from Carr, so quarterback can be an outside possibility here as well. But I think that would be a bit of a reach. That's why Jeudy makes a lot of sense. And from day one, you could argue he is the best wide receiver on that roster. At number 13, the Indianapolis Colts select wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. And in a similar situation as the Las Vegas Raiders, the Colts could go quarterback here as they refuse to commit to Jacoby Brissett. But I think it's more than likely that the Colts ultimately end up with one of those veteran free agent quarterbacks. So to me, that means wide receiver is the pick that makes the most sense here. And if you think about it, T.Y. Hilton isn't getting any younger. He clearly struggles staying healthy for the entire season. Guys that they've added, a la Devin Funchess, also had issues last season staying on the field. CeeDee Lamb, if he's not the top wide receiver, he's the 1B behind Jerry Jeudy. I think he's going to be a very welcome addition, and all things considered, the Colts don't have a lot of holes on this roster, and they're probably one quarterback away from really competing, and adding Lamb is a huge get for them, whoever plays quarterback for this upcoming season. At number 14, the Tampa Bay Bucs select defensive end AJ Epenesa. And for the Bucs, this would be a great plug-and-play selection in my opinion, because they are expected to lose several guys on that defensive line, which was such an integral part of them being able to shut down the run. Epenesa is a versatile defensive end that at one point was a top 10 selection. We'll see if that's the case here. He's kind of been falling down, maybe a little bit of a forgotten name in some mock drafts, but he makes a lot of sense. The way I see it, I think the Bucs can go one of three ways: potentially offensive line, defensive line, where I'm not ruling out another defensive tackle, or secondary, as they did give up a lot of big plays defensively back there. But for now, we are going with Epenesa to go ahead and revitalize that defensive line and potentially rejuice it as some of those departures are expected to take place. Next at number 15, the Denver Broncos select wide receiver Henry Ruggs. And as great as it was to see guys like Courtland Sutton step up and kind of break out and Noah Fant have some success as a rookie, if you want to see your young quarterback in Drew Lock continue to develop after he showed several flashes last season, then you need to add more talent on that offense, especially after they traded away Emmanuel Sanders. Ruggs makes a lot of sense. He has got crazy speed. I will say in the secondary, you could potentially look at a cornerback here with the expected departure of Chris Harris. But I do believe you want to focus on developing that young quarterback. So wide receiver probably takes precedence, and Henry Ruggs is touted as that next best wide receiver after Jeudy and Lamb. Next, to number 16, the Atlanta Falcons select defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw. And for the Falcons, more likely than not, this will be a pick on the defensive side of the football, specifically on the defensive line. And I'd guess either defensive tackle or defensive end, whichever makes more sense in terms of best player available. Right now, that is Kinlaw. And I'd say he could very well be gone before this, a fringe top 10 guy that's getting a lot of buzz right now. For the Falcons offensively, they've got all the pieces there. You could argue offensive line, but they did have a lot of injuries. They are losing pieces on the defensive line, and Quinn is still there as the head coach. He's got the defensive mentality. Honestly, it's been the defense that's kind of been holding them back since their Super Bowl run. Offensively, they can put up the numbers, but the defense just can't keep them in games. So right now, they get a stalwart for their defensive line in Kinlaw. At number 17, the Dallas Cowboys select safety Xavier McKinney. And for the Cowboys, a very popular choice has been getting help in the secondary in the first round of this draft. And it makes sense. Look, offensively, they've got a lot of their key pieces already set in place, from the offensive line to the running back, quarterback, wide receivers as well. Now, obviously, we have to see what happens with Cooper and Dak in the offseason, but the expectation is that they will return. Defensively, though, there are some question marks, and after the missed out sweepstakes on Earl Thomas, the unknown situation of Byron Jones, that's why addressing the secondary makes a lot of sense. And the two names that have been floated around are McKinney and Delpit. I think whoever the Cowboys go with, they cannot go wrong. At number 18, the Miami Dolphins are back on the clock and select safety Grant Delpit. This is a pick that the Dolphins acquired after trading away safety Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Steelers during the season, so it only makes sense that they potentially get his replacement here in another young stud. Delpit, like we previously mentioned, he is in the conversation of best safety prospect in this entire draft alongside McKinney. So the Dolphins can't go wrong here. Honestly, they could use a lot of help throughout their roster. I think they're in a perfect position here to go best player available. So it wouldn't surprise me if they pick a defensive lineman or defensive end that started to slip. I did go ahead and potentially throw that around as an idea. I could see them go offensive line to potentially protect their investment in Tua. But again, maybe a little bit foreshadowing to that final pick of the Dolphins later on in the first round. For now, though, they go with the replacement of Minkah Fitzpatrick in Grant Delpit. At number 19, the Las Vegas Raiders select linebacker Kenneth Murray. And for the Raiders, this is a pick that could potentially be what they were hoping that Vontaze Burfict would be. But after his 12-game suspension last season, it proved that they can't really rely on that guy long term. Hopefully he can turn it around and stay on the football field for an entire season without getting a suspension. But Kenneth Murray is a great investment nonetheless. He is the next best linebacker after Isaiah Simmons. It's a position of need. The Raiders need to upgrade the play on the defensive side of the football. I think defensive line is okay. They've had some nice pieces in the secondary, but they did have a lot of injuries there throughout the season. Linebacker makes a lot of sense. You could potentially look at quarterback. It wouldn't shock me all that much, but right now I think Murray is the better value pick. At number 20, the Jacksonville Jaguars select defensive back C.J. Henderson. And in a move similar to what we have the Miami Dolphins doing, the Jaguars elect to go ahead and replace the lost talent in Jalen Ramsey, who they traded away to the Rams during the season, by getting a younger and cheaper version of him. Now, the thing with CJ Henderson is he's expected to be that next cornerback after Jeff Okudah in terms of prospects, and also a guy that has great speed. And pair him up with Isaiah Simmons, who we have the Jaguars selecting earlier on in the first round. Those two guys could be the defensive stalwarts for this unit for years to come. And in a move to potentially go ahead and get back to those days of 2-3 years ago when the Jaguars made that run in the playoffs behind a dominant defense and a game managing offensive script, which they still could have, but they have to return to defensive dominance first, and this pick definitely does that. Next, at number 21, the Philadelphia Eagles select wide receiver T. Higgins. And for the Eagles, wide receiver was a huge problem area after there was injury after injury after injury. Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, Nelson Aguilar. And there's questions as to which one of those guys will continue to be there long term. So getting a younger replacement for those guys to go ahead and help that pass heavy offense makes a lot of sense. Carson Wentz needs more weapons around him. He has the talent when he's healthy. We know the Philadelphia Eagles can contend. Now, I will say defense is also a possibility here. The secondary was a huge problem yet again. They could use some cornerback help, so it wouldn't surprise me in the least if they go in that direction. But right now, I think wide receiver is slightly a bigger area of need, and there's still some great wide receiver talent at this point in the draft. At number 22, the Buffalo Bills select wide receiver Laviska Shenault. And for the Bills, they added guys like John Brown and Cole Beasley last year. And even though they're nice pieces, I would say they're more complementary than mainstays on that offense. They need that potential elite wide receiver. I do believe Shenault can be that. He is that big-bodied guy. Maybe reminds some people of Kelvin Benjamin when the Bills tried that trade out with the Panthers. Obviously, Benjamin was not a success in Buffalo, but Shenault could be that guy that catches some of those errant passes of Josh Allen from time to time. Otherwise, all the pieces are there for Buffalo. They've got a running back. They've got a young quarterback. They've got some nice complementary pieces. They need that next elite guy defensively. They're good. They've got a defensive-minded head coach. I do believe you want to focus on adding more elite playmakers around Josh Allen to go ahead and help the Bills make a deeper run in the playoffs as soon as next year. At number 23, the New England Patriots select offensive lineman Josh Jones. And for the Patriots, they could go a number of different directions here. Kind of crazy to think about considering it's the Patriots, but we saw how much they struggled at the wide receiver position, so maybe they add another playmaker there. Quarterback is obviously going to be the big storyline during the offseason. Does Tom Brady return or not for the Patriots? I personally believe he will. But if he doesn't, this pick more than likely could become a quarterback, someone like a Jake Fromm. We will see. But assuming that Tom Brady is still there, I think the pieces that make the most sense are offensive line. You have got some impending retirements, free agency losses, and if Tom Brady stays another year, you need to protect him. You can get weapons during free agency. Another option here would be going linebacker. Kyle Van Noy expected to potentially join another team. That would be a big loss for them. So I look at a guy like a Patrick Queen. That could be a potential target here. But for now, I'm looking at the offensive line and prioritizing that as if Tom Brady sticks around, you desperately need to focus on protecting him as long as you can. At number 24, the New Orleans Saints select wide receiver Jalen Reagor in an attempt to finally get that consistent wide receiver number 2 opposite Michael Thomas. And sure, Thomas is an absolute stud, and he's been carrying this New Orleans Saints offense for the last couple of years alongside Breeze and Alvin Kamara. But at some point, you need to add another guy that can threaten coverages and that Drew Brees consistently and comfortably go to if Michael Thomas is double covered, because Ted Ginn just will not cut it. He's getting older, and even though he has the speed, he has serious consistency issues. On the flip side, Reagor is one of those guys that potentially might remind some people of Brendan Cooks, a little bit smaller in terms of size, but he's got good speed, and pair him up with Michael Thomas. I think that could be a very nice duo. The Saints, though, they don't have that many holes, so you could potentially see them go best player available here, depending on who is available. So either way, it should be pretty interesting. Cornerback is also another area that they could target. Right now, though, I see a bigger need at the wide receiver position. At number 25, the Minnesota Vikings select defensive back Trevon Diggs. And after the year that one Xavier Rhodes had in Minnesota, it's no shock that so many people are mocking defensive back help for the Vikings. And here we might potentially be seeing the replacement of Xavier Rhodes being chosen. In this scenario, it's Trevon Diggs. I expect Diggs to be a first round selection around this point, or maybe a little bit later in the first round, but he, alongside with other guys like a CJ Henderson, are in that maybe second, third, fourth best cornerback discussion. We'll see how that plays out and how these guys separate from each other after the combine, after interviews, after workouts. At this point in time, though, this is a marriage that makes a lot of sense as the Vikings hopefully shore up one of their weaknesses that they had in 2019. At number 26, with their third and final first-round pick, the Miami Dolphins select offensive lineman Austin Jackson. And it's honestly pretty simple here, folks. After selecting your future franchise quarterback in Tua that's had injury history, you want to go ahead and add protection surrounding him, especially after you traded away Laramie Tunsil. Austin Jackson does exactly that. I believe anytime you draft a franchise quarterback, if you can pair him up with a potential franchise offensive lineman, that makes all the sense in the world, and that's exactly what the Miami Dolphins do here. At number 27, the Seattle Seahawks select defensive end Yetur Gross-Matos. And for Seattle, this could potentially be a replacement of one Jadeveon Clowney. Even though Seattle traded for Clowney, they really want to go ahead and probably avoid paying him that big contract that he will be desperately seeking. Sure, he applied some good pressure throughout the season, but I don't think he was quite as dominant as Seattle was hoping for. If that was the case, we'd be hearing more chatter about them wanting to get him on a multi-year deal to stay in Seattle. Instead, in this scenario, they get a nice, young, cheap defensive end in Gross-Matos that at this point is a good value pick and can reallocate that money elsewhere. At number 28, the Baltimore Ravens select outside linebacker K'Lavon Chaisson. And Chaisson adds a lot of versatility with this pick because I think he can go ahead, play both edge and outside linebacker with a specialty in rushing the passer. We'll see how Baltimore, whoever drafts him, decides to use him, but potentially he could be that Terrell Suggs replacement. And that stalwart for a defense that is on the rise, had a nice, surprising type of season, as did the entire Baltimore team. And as long as you've got a healthy Lamar Jackson doing what he did last season, you know the Ravens are going to be all right offensively. Go ahead, add more defensive talent so the Ravens can become an even bigger force. I like this pick a lot. I think the Ravens probably go with the defensive side of the football in round one. Next to number 29, the Tennessee Titans select defensive end John Greenard. And while I love the idea of the Titans adding some edge rusher help to get after an interdivisional quarterback like a Deshaun Watson, I will say don't sleep on a potential running back selection here, because sooner rather than later, the Titans have to make a decision on Derrick Henry and if they want to pay him the big salary that he is expected to demand. To some extent, it makes sense. He was a big reason why they went on the run that they did, specifically in the playoffs. But as we all know from a financial standpoint, overpaying your running backs out of any other position in the NFL kind of doesn't make sense because they are so replaceable. Honestly, I'd love to hear from Titans fans here on how they feel on the subject matter and whether they'd like to make Derrick Henry a top 5 paid running back in the NFL for the Titans to retain him, considering how close they were this last season to making a deep run, potentially being in the Super Bowl. But that meaning they're probably going to have to sacrifice some talent at other positions? Or would you rather, at the end of the first round, take a chance on one of these rookie running backs that likely won't be going until later on in the first round, or maybe even in the early second round? At number 30, the Green Bay Packers select linebacker Patrick Queen. And to me, the Green Bay Packers are probably between one of two choices, either linebacker or wide receiver. And wide receiver is the one that's going to garner more attention, considering what we saw from that offense from Aaron Rodgers and from wide receivers outside of Devontae Adams for Green Bay in 2019, and it makes a lot of sense. But the reason I'm going with linebacker and Patrick Queen specifically is because I think there's a bigger drop-off after the top 2-3 linebackers in this draft class compared to the wide receivers, where I think still on day 2 of the NFL draft, you can get some real good talent at the wide receiver position. I'd love to hear from Green Bay Packers fans in the comments. What do you want to see the Packers do? Is it really a must wide receiver selection in round 1? Or are there other positions like the linebacker position that you'd like to see the Packers upgrade first? At number 31, the San Francisco 49ers select defensive back Christian Fulton. To me, this pick will either come down to offensive lineman or defensive back help. Offensive line makes sense in terms of some of the injuries that were suffered by the 49ers last season. But defensive back help, look, Richard Sherman isn't getting any younger, even though he did have a pretty good regular season. He kind of struggled during the playoffs, specifically in the Super Bowl, maybe got a little bit exposed there. He's not getting any younger. That's the major concern. He's already suffered one serious injury in his career. Go ahead, build for the future, get your heir apparent in Fulton, and provide him a chance to learn from one of the best cornerbacks in recent history in Richard Sherman while he is still available to you. And finally, at number 32, the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs select wide receiver Justin Jefferson. And it's almost unfair to think that the Chiefs continue to add more offensive weapons for Patrick Mahomes. But with the potential departure of Sammy Watkins during the offseason, this is a choice that makes sense. Go ahead, add a big body wide receiver opposite of Tyreek Hill, another red zone threat for Mahomes. I will say, getting a replacement for Chris Jones on the defensive line, if he leaves, that's a big if, during free agency, would also make a lot of sense. But for now, we address the more likely possibility, which at this point is the departure of Sammy Watkins. So Justin Jefferson is the pick. So with that, we wrap up our look into our first NFL mock draft of the season, version 1.0, specifically the pre-NFL Combine possibilities. As always, let me hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree with these picks? What do you think your respective teams will and should do in the draft? If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. I'll see you guys in future videos where we'll continue to break down all of these NFL draft scenarios and more.